Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. We're glad you're with us today. We are continuing our discussion on spiritual practices that transform our lives. And if this is the first time you're watching this, we have been doing a series where we have talked about prayer, we have talked about reading God's Word, we've talked about worship and a couple of other things. And not just talked about it, but rather we have heard stories from people who have put those things into practice or who are experiencing spiritual transformation through doing what God has called us to do. And today we are talking about simplicity. And we're joined today by Dennis and Tawana. Thanks so much for taking the time. Thanks for being here today. To start out, let's just let the people know who you are, what you've done. Give us a little background to set up this conversation.
All right, we're Dennis and Tawana Johnson. We served as missionaries with World Gospel Mission. Actually started in 1973, and we worked with WGM for 42 years until we retired.
Awesome.
And we were appointed to the country of Bolivia, South America. Of course, we didn't get there until we had raised our support and gone to Costa Rica to study Spanish.
Yeah, of course, as one does.
Yeah. And so in 75, we arrived in Bolivia. And we worked in a very rural setting in a church planting ministry. And from there, over the years, we worked in different ministries on the field, including different things like teaching, and she has a medical background, and we became leaders on the field, and we ran a missionary boarding home, and just a lot of different things down through the years. And
raised 5 kids.
And raised 5
Wow.
children.
Good for you. I'm working on one right now.
Yeah.
Yes, I can't imagine.
And 4 of those were born there in Bolivia. And after being in Bolivia almost 25 years, we were asked to come back here to Marion, Indiana, and work in the headquarters of World Gospel Mission, where I was able to be involved in oversight of all of the fields of WGM and all of the missionaries around the world. And Tawana was able to develop a member care ministry for World Gospel Mission. But before we got to retirement age, we both were feeling uneasy and felt like we want to go back to the field. We want to finish up on a mission field. And so we requested of the mission that they reassign us back to a field, and actually allowed the president of the mission at that time to choose which field he felt we could serve best. And that's when we went to Mexico. And a lot of the folks here at Brookhaven, of course, know that, as we were involved here at that time. And we worked about 4 years there before retirement. And we continued to do things with WGM in retirement. One of the things we're doing is keeping in touch with the retirees of World Gospel Mission that are located mostly in this part of the United States. And we do continue to stay in touch with Mexico and the pastors, the leaders, and the people there. That's kind of where we're at.
Yeah.
We
Great.
live here in Marion, Indiana, and this is our home.
Great. That's a good summary of a lot of
That was a
work that's
lot.
been done. No, you've done a lot over the years, so it's good to hear that. Now, I would imagine, in some ways it goes without saying, if you're going to be a missionary, that things are going to change and you're going to adjust and things are going to be different for you. I imagine even more going to the field in the 70s, what that would have been like. Can you start to give us some insight into the ways that simplicity, maybe it sounds like maybe it was forced on you, not by choice you were practicing simplicity, but because of circumstances initially, simplicity became a practice in some way?
Well, the first place that we went was out in the country, and so it took like several hours just to get a short distance because of roads. And then when we got there, it was very, very simplistic in that as far as furniture, we had the bare minimum, and we didn't really have a lot and yet it was not all that simple. I mean, you know, we were back to nature where you used the wringer wash machine, you had the outhouse, and you had the chickens and all of that.
Simplicity doesn't necessarily mean easy, right?
No. So, but it was all pretty well stripped down to what we had before.
And so in those initial phases, the first, whatever, year or two or three, maybe the whole first term, what is your soul feeling like? Were you pushing back against that? Like, I can't have my comforts. Why do we have to do these things this way? It's stupid, whatever. Or what do you feel? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
The only thing that I pushed back on was that I didn't have, I mean, it was just a brick floor. And I was raising little kids, and at first that was the hardest. The Lord has blessed me to be married to a man who can put things together and make them all work a lot nicer. So that did. But no, it was, having grown up as a missionary kid and actually this was even less comforts than I had when I was growing up. But some of it I was used to, but Dennis was the one that...
Yeah, well, I grew up in a rural area of Minnesota. And we always had an outhouse. And so that wasn't any real big issue with me. But I had learned to do a lot of things. And I can remember trying to build things with a machete and a hammer, and that's about all I had until I could get some other tools around and do things. But for the most part, that wasn't a real difficult adjustment. Of course, there was adjustment to not being around family and not having a church family and all of those things.
Yeah.
But the adjustment to the simplicity was sort of like me going back to my childhood, where I grew up with not much, and we just made do with what we had.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that life out there was a lot slower.
Sure.
And so we had the only well in the area, and so our neighbors that lived right around there would come and get water from the well. And so then I'd have a chance to sit and talk to the ladies, and there was no big hurry to get everything done, so
Yeah.
we would sit and talk. I mean, we'd stand there and talk while she got the water, and that was good for our Spanish too. We
Right.
did a lot more practicing with our Spanish, but it was really nice.
Right. Now, I'm curious, as you would be in Bolivia for your term and then come back stateside did you come back for a year at a time, right? Year, and then go back to Bolivia for 4, however many years. I'm curious about that transition back and forth, and with regards to simplicity and the lifestyle, did you find yourself really embracing and indulging in American lifestyle when you were back here, and then just kind of being forced to give it up when you went back to Bolivia? Or did you find that you were being, seeing American lifestyle as maybe a little foreign? Like, talk through that, yeah.
I can remember when we came back on furlough after being there, it hit me really hard seeing all of the stuff that we had and people have here. And I can remember talking with some of my own family members who I could be more honest with and saying, you know, people here have more things in their closets that they never use, or in their garage where they can't put their car because the garage is full of something else than what people own. And that really did hit me hard when I saw that, and it helped me a lot to learn how to get along with what I had and not really desire all of the toys and things that can sometimes be available. So that was a tremendous transition for me, that first furlough, seeing the difference of what people had and how they live.
Yeah, and I'm going to come to you in a second, Tawana, but just a note for you at home, like, because if you're not a missionary, but you have experienced this probably. If you've ever moved, you went to college, you moved away from college, you packed up your family once, and you had the dumpster outside, and you started throwing all the things away, and you kind of realize, wow, I've got,
Right.
why do we have all this stuff? We don't even, why are we moving this junk and then we store it in our house? I think a lot of us have experienced a taste of that, right? Okay, Twan, I want to give you a chance to answer the question if you had something you want to say about that.
I think that coming back to the States, probably the biggest thing was going to the grocery store and seeing, you have 1,500, it seemed,
Yeah.
choices of cereal when all we had was Frosted Flakes and My Soy,
Yeah.
and that was what we had for cereal. If we ever asked anybody to bring us something to us from the U.S., we would ask for a couple boxes of cereal.
Sure.
So that was probably, just going to the grocery store was probably the hardest, the most,
Yeah.
where you see so much when there isn't that much.
I have taken taco mix to missionaries, and I have taken Jif peanut butter to missionaries. Those are the two things that they couldn't get and they really craved. Now, here's what I'm curious about. As missionaries, people might say, okay, well, that's the territory you're going into. You willingly give these things up. That's the job. Give it up. Go to the field. And you tough it out, and you come back to the States, and you get your things, and then you go back to the field. What I'm really intrigued by is the idea, okay, but if simplicity is something that we can practice as a spiritual discipline, as something that God can use to mold us and shape us and transform us, even if maybe it was forced on you or you didn't choose how you practice simplicity, it was just given to you. I am curious still then, how did that shape you spiritually over the years, over the decades? What do you think that was doing to your soul? What did God teach you through that?
Well, I think part of it is that, one, you hold things lightly. I'm still very sentimental, and I still have, my kids think I have way too many, pictures or I keep anything anyone's given to me, if it was a special
Right.
person that gave it to me. But I also have learned to hold things lightly because that's not what's important. I think, when we went to Mexico, we left all our stuff here except for kitchen stuff and a bed and our clothes, of course, and then just picked up things there because in Mexico we were living in the city of 2 million people, so it was quite modern and all. But our house that we lived in was just a townhouse which was connected to this one, to that one, and actually the people around us had more than we did. But it was just refreshing to be able to not be tied down to those things and be able to have relationships with people, have time to sit on our little terrace and have time with the Lord. And that is something that we've continued since we come back. Now, I know that when we came back, we retired. So it makes a difference. When you're retired, you have a little more time to sit on the porch and read God's Word. But that is a practice, I think, that we've been able to keep through the years, to take the time to realize that people are more important than things. And so I think that was where the simplicity in life where we're not just trying to get more and more things, but spend more and more time with people.
Yeah, that's really good. I like the reality that you are living in that now. You're off the field, you're off the missionary life, you're not in the forced simplicity situation, and yet you've learned from that. You've had these takeaway lessons and are able to apply that to holding possessions lightly, spending more time with people, simplifying in those ways, which I think is really good. So if you're at home and you say, well, I'm not called to go overseas to be missionaries. Okay, they happen to be missionaries, and that's the example we're using, but we can practice simplicity. All of us can practice that. You don't have to go live in the sticks in the third world to experience and practice simplicity. Now, I am also curious because as missionaries, you do bring a unique perspective to be able to see the North American culture with an outside lens. And I wonder if you want to speak prophetically, if there are things you observe. So if somebody's watching and they say, okay, but I'm not really sure how I'm supposed to practice simplicity. You talked about washing clothes without a automatic washing machine. Is that what I'm supposed to do? We talked about living 2 hours away from the city. Are you telling me I need to move in the sticks? No, probably not. So what might be, can you think of practical ways of things you see in North American culture that you might say, what if you tried to practice simplicity maybe like this or like this? Any ideas?
Well, I think one thing is instead of, going and getting the newest and the biggest or whatever, I have no problem updating stuff, but maybe see what we have on hand to use or repurpose, or that has been, really a freeing thing to just be able to, okay, what can I make out of what I've got? Mm-hmm. Or how can I, in a yard sale, get some money so that I can redo this or repaint. I love to watch how they take something from a flea market and fix it up really pretty. And so you haven't spent as much money, and yet you're using the creative process that God has given you. So as an example, we just brought our bedroom from upstairs to downstairs. And Dennis is one of those that doesn't get rid of anything. So a lot of ours, he just repurposed everything to go into that project. And I do sewing. I can repurpose what I have to make something out of what's there. And I think that's something that all of us can do, that we don't have to go and buy everything. We can try to figure out how to redo.
Yeah. I like that you used the word freeing, because it kind of highlights the great irony or counterintuitive nature of Christianity as a whole: winning by losing, surrendering to God, giving up, denial of self, picking up your cross, all of these things that are, in simplicity, all of these things that are maybe on the surface not initially desirable. They're not glamorous. They're not things that we initially say, oh, sign me up for that. That sounds great. And yet, when we put spiritual practices into practice and God begins working on our soul and kind of shows us how these things can be freeing, it is ironic, it is counterintuitive, and yet the mystery of the cross of the gospel of Jesus is that way, right? Anything else you want to add to that? I've really appreciated this time. Yeah, Dennis.
Speaking of simplicity, when we went to Mexico, we didn't go with the idea of doing what we ended up doing. We were going to come alongside pastors and leaders, and ended up being named pastors and leaders of a non-group, basically, that was just barely starting. But what we did is we stuck to the very basic things: the Bible, preach simple sermons, short sermons, no big, no fanfare, no flags, no banners, no big programs. And it is amazing how God worked with that, with the basics. And we realized that people didn't know the basics of the Bible. And so if we would have been trying to be theological or trying to be
We were theological.
overwhelmingly, whatever the word may be, I don't think that the Lord would have blessed that ministry. And so, even here, I'm probably the king of keeping stuff and king of repurposing stuff. But it's a nice feeling to know that with what you have, if you really desire to, you can get along with what you have, usually, without having to get a lot more.
Yeah.
And so, spiritually, I grew more spiritually in Mexico in my life, probably than ever in my life, because basically I had to study the Bible almost every day, read and study, prepare, preach, teach, which I had never done before. And getting back to that basic, the Bible, to me was the key.
I love that simplicity in worship. As North American Christians, we would do better maybe to hold some things lightly that we are very passionate about our
That's right.
opinions on what worship looks like on a Sunday morning, and what lights, music, pews, decor. Oh man, I didn't even think about that when I asked you guys to speak, but I got a soapbox just for that. So that's a really great thing to bring up. So thanks so much for your time. Thanks for being here. We really appreciate it. And so for you guys watching, if maybe this is the first time you thought about simplicity as something that not just missionaries or nuns or people in convents and monasteries do, but that there might be value in us practicing simplicity. Maybe you have given something up for Lent before, or maybe you can consider, do you really need to buy a brand new phone every year? And that's just an example. I don't want to harp on one particular thing, but it's an example to get us to think about, are our lives unnecessary complex? Is it more of a burden for us to keep up with these things that we need in this stuff, and bordering on greed, and can it creep in that way? And finding this beautiful freedom in following Jesus in simplicity and in authenticity through that. Thanks so much for joining us. God bless you guys.